Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt here at the Water Office in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm with our other co-director, Diane New, who is, maybe will give us a wave, there she is, and Annalie Martin, who is from the Mennonite Voluntary Service Program and is on the water staff this year. This is Wednesday, July 14th, 2021, and we are delighted to have each and every one of you with us for this program about a book I like very much, Illusions of Innocence, written by Marcy Litle, who is with us today. And we will have an opportunity to hear from her very shortly. But a special welcome to those who are new to water programs. There are 4 programs a month of different sorts of meditation, a liturgy, a tea, and this kind of water talk. And we are taking our annual hiatus beginning in Jeanette spoke. To speak of the devil, there she is. We just spoke of you, darling. We will take our annual hiatus for August and then be back in September for a new round of programs. And I am particularly happy to see that there are so many of you from the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South. And I think of you, and we at Water think of you as a sister center to us. And we really are delighted to have you. And Annalie, who's finishing up with us this season, will be heading to North Carolina. So you may, in fact, find her in your circles. Let me say something about our program today, again, with a special welcome to those who are new, and particularly to Marcy, who is new to our programs. Like all water efforts, this Water Talk is not simply an academic seminar. It's a way to learn in order to bring what we learn to the creation of a more just and equitable world. The book we're looking at today is a very helpful resource for predominantly white groups like ours to look at what we don't want to look at with regard to racism. The author comes from our sister center, the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South, led so ably and so faithfully by Jeanette Stokes. In their recent funding letter, they suggested that people who donate to them, as I'm happy to do, also donate to a women's organization led by women of color. I see that as a concrete manifestation of the ideas explored in this book, but there are many, many, many others. Our format is as follows. I'll give a brief introduction to our speaker, who will then have about 20 or 25 minutes to lay out her thinking about the topic and about her book, and there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers, for discussion and dialogue. We invite you to listen and enjoy. We even take notes, which will be on our website shortly after Marcy has had a quick look at them for accuracy or to add anything we may have missed. Annalie will see to it that our audio is muted to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. When our speaker finishes, you can join the conversation, and we'll talk more about that at the time. We will end promptly at 2 Eastern Daylight Time to respect everyone's schedule. And then you can re-listen to this or point other people in the direction of this teleconference by going to Water's website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and you'll see a picture of Marcy and the link to both the video of this presentation as well as the notes. We'll keep the Zoom line open for those who wish to continue conversation for a bit after 2 o'clock, but the official session will end then with our gratitude to Marcy, and those who want to leave gracefully will have every opportunity to do so. Let me welcome Dr. Marcy Litle, who is the author of Illusions of Innocence. And as I hold the book up, I must tell you that it's published by that famous publishing company in Durham, North Carolina, called the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South, published in 2020. And they have published a number of very good things, especially books that Jeanette Stokes has written, which I have found really terrific. But this one is a real gem. It's also very beautiful. And one of the things about the Resource Center is that their aesthetic is really something to pay attention to. They do a beautiful job at the things that they do. And I think this volume, Marcy, is just, and Jeanette, is just as beautiful as it is well written and thoughtful and important, but it's also beautiful. And there's something about the importance to me of beauty in the struggles for social justice, that if we let that go, we've lost something, and you have not let that go. I'm appreciative. Marcy, since we're not acquainted personally, I've learned about you from the description of you on your book. Marcy was born in Charleston, South Carolina, grew up in the suburbs of New York City, and for most of her adult life has lived in Durham, North Carolina, where she taught Latin American history and international studies at Duke University until her retirement in 2012. Since 2001, she has split her time between Durham and Seattle, Washington, where she is now. And there she enjoys spending time with her granddaughters and their parents. Since her retirement, she has volunteered for the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South. This is her first book, she says. But she goes on to understate something rather important. She says in her spare time, she likes to paint. Her work can be seen at her website, marcylit.com. And I say it's an understatement because as I went on the website and looked at her acrylics on canvas, I thought, well, that must be her day job. And teaching Latin American studies and Latin American history and international studies must have been sort of her hobby, but she reverses that in her self-description. So I don't know, Marcy, maybe that's changed with retirement, but I thought your artwork was just marvelous and the book as well. Here's what we at Water said about the book. We didn't know Marcy, and but we wrote this. This is white people doing their anti-racism work, which is a quote from the book, with grace and grit. It's not easy to look systemic racism in the eye and see oneself staring straight back. But it's the work required of white people to undo generations of privilege and embrace future generations of justice. Readers and reading groups will take a well-written lesson from this book. That's the end of our book blurb. You can find that on our Water website under what we're reading. Every other month, we put out a little list of about a dozen volumes of things that we like. We don't put things that we don't like, but we put things that we like that we want to recommend. So it's what we're reading. So we're here to learn more from the author of this very unique and I would say accessible book, a collection of short essays that express the many facets of being a white woman in a racist society. It's reflections on our responsibilities. Welcome to you, Marcy, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. That was very generous. Thanks. I'm so grateful to Mary and to Diane for inviting me to talk about my project today. I want to thank Annalie North Martin for helping us with the logistics and hope maybe I get to see you more if you move to North Carolina. Also, the book that led to this invitation published, as Mary said, by the Resource Center based in Durham. It would not, basically, I wouldn't be here and the book wouldn't exist if Jeanette Stokes didn't exist. So if Jeanette Stokes and the Resource Center didn't exist. So I need to thank her always for any attention that this book gets. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us. I'm really grateful that you want to talk about this with me. In The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin writes, and we cannot be free until they are free. I'll say that again. We cannot be free until they are free. This really struck me when I read it a few years ago. I realized that he was talking about me. When he says, when they are free, he's talking about me. When, you know, I'm an American white girl, I thought I was free, but he apparently didn't think I was free. And I realized he meant me, and that one of my responsibilities was to do what I could to free myself as much as I could. Baldwin's words speaks to the value of doing our own work as white people. And what he doesn't say, but what I've learned, is that for me at least, the work is best done both in solitude and in good company. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about both sides of that process that ended up with this book. So I'm going to talk, hopefully not too much, a little bit about me, maybe not as much as I thought because Mary told you most of the important bits, a little more about the project that resulted in the book and what I think I've learned, punctuated by a tiny bit of reading from the book. And then I'm looking forward to talking with folks when I'm done. So I did grow up in the New York suburbs. I think the piece that might be relevant that is not in the little bio is that my parents were from little towns in Arkansas and Missouri, and that we went to a Southern Baptist church in Greenwich, Connecticut. We drove 30 minutes twice on Sundays and once on Wednesday to attend a Southern Baptist church, even though we were living in Westchester County, New York. So that I did not grow up in the South. My parents in many ways are marginally Southern, not deeply heartland Southern, but I feel like in some ways I'm a Southerner, a white Southerner. As Mary said, I became an historian. I taught Latin American history and international studies. I'm not an expert on race in America. I have thought, when I was teaching, I taught a lot about colonialism and oppression and race and class, but always in this international context. And so that when I retired, the space opened up, and this project became one of the things that opened up. It also explains the art as a side project, because I didn't start painting really until I was very close to retirement. And so I didn't think of myself as an artist or somebody who makes art until much later in my life. And the book has reproductions of 5 paintings that I painted with Mary Jane Rivers, for the person who said that she knows her. We were at a painting retreat up in near Seattle, and I was working on the book, and so one time I painted a series of 5 paintings that were based on the work that I was doing on the book, and they are in the book, and they're also even better reproduced on my website. So this book resulted from a personal journey that was sparked by events all too familiar to us today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, except it's a thing that we know and that is routine and should never be, which is the killing of Black Americans. My attention was caught starting with the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012, and then in 2014 with Michael Brown in Ferguson. And then I think because I was born in Charleston, the killing at the Mother Emanuel Church there was particularly noteworthy to me, or horrible to me. So in the light of all these, I felt like I could no longer look away. So, which I'd been doing a pretty good job of up till then, even though I taught about race and class in these other contexts. So I decided to pay attention and learn. So I want to tell you a little bit about the path that I took as I decided to pay attention to this subject. This is how I described the project early in the book. People in my book club know that I'm very fond of quotes. I like, because for me, quoting is engaging in conversation with another author. So here I'm quoting myself, so it's not quite the same, but here's a brief description from the beginning of the book of what I think this project was about, or is about. After the shooting in Charleston, several Black writers suggested that the most useful thing white people can do to combat racism is talk to white people. So that is what I'm trying to do, starting with myself. I am trying to unearth the elements of my own racial formation in order to understand how they have shaped my life, to gain some freedom, and perhaps to make things a tiny bit better. I didn't set out to write a book. I didn't set out to go public about this journey. I just set out to learn more about race in America, and in particular to learn more about how this thing that I had been able to mostly ignore impacted my life. And the project proceeded along 3 main paths. I was exploring, and the exploration took 3 main forms. And these are things that I think other folks could do. I mean, I'm not saying this is the only way to explore your own trajectory journey as a white person, but this is how it worked for me. In late 2014, the Resource Center prompted by a challenge from writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, decided that a small group of us would together read Michelle Alexander's book about mass incarceration called The New Jim Crow. That experience seemed so fruitful that we decided to keep going and invite a few more folks to join us. And we've been going ever since. We meet intermittently. Sometimes we meet every week. Sometimes we meet once a month. Sometimes when I'm in Seattle and tied up with my grandchildren, sometimes there's a chunky break. As we've talked about, I made an annotated bibliography of what we've read, most of what we've read over the years, and it's available on the Resource Center website, but you will receive it. It'll be part of the notes that go with this project. And we discovered that the creation of a safe community dedicated to an honest and open exploration has turned out to be a very fruitful container for deepening our understanding of race and our own place in its evolution in America. I mean, we have, because we've been working at this together for so long, we are I think we're very comfortable at talking about these issues that otherwise are very difficult to talk about. At the same time, I started exploring in my journal what I could remember about how race showed up in my own life. I searched for memories, some of which are recounted in the book, and I started paying more attention to how people acted around race in my own life. So I wanted to share two brief examples from the book that illustrate the kinds of things I was noticing or thinking about. The first one is a memory. It's one of the earliest pieces in the book, and it's called The Choir. Our house in the New York suburbs had 3 bedrooms, one for each of my parents, my brother, one each for my parents, my brother, and me, and a small study with a burnt orange fold-out sofa that was my father's special place. Whenever we had overnight guests, they got my room over the garage, and I slept in the study. Always me, never my brother, separated from my things and from my privacy. Usually guests meant grandparents or other relatives. But one time our church hosted a gospel choir from the Deep South, Mississippi or Alabama, and 2 members stayed at our house, in my room, of course. They slept in my twin beds. I don't remember how many nights they stayed, probably just 1 or 2. After they left, my mother stripped the beds and opened all the windows wide, even though it was a cold day. She'd never done this before, that I could recall. The room, not mine again until it, quote, aired out. I asked why and never really got an answer. Not that I recall, but I knew. And then the one that came up as I was just trying to pay attention is called Casual Racism. A slender Black man sits in the middle seat across the aisle from me, with an empty aisle seat beside him. We are near the front of the plane, prime spots for those with tight connections. We are on Southwest. There are no assigned seats. I watch my fellow passengers walk by us. They do not choose the open aisle seat. Do I need to say that they are white? And then I watch more white people choose nearby middle seats rather than the more desirable one on the aisle. On another Southwest flight, I choose an aisle seat beside a Black man in the window seat. Only after I sit down do I catch the subtext of my choice. I assume no one will choose the seat between us. I will get more room. And I am right, almost. Finally, right before they close the door, a man, another Black man, chooses the seat. And so that was the second thing, was just trying to dig up memories and really just pay attention to something I hadn't been paying attention to. Finally, I decided to see what I could learn about my own family's history as it relates to race. And I discovered what felt shocking to me at the time, which is shocking, except not very unusual, it turns out. I discovered that some of my ancestors had actually participated in enslaving other people. and perpetuating that enslavement. And they weren't big plantation owners. They just were white Southerners who grew crops and maybe tried to grow cotton and used enslaved labor. There are readily accessible genealogical resources online now. You don't even have to leave home to learn a lot, especially if you are white and your family has been on this continent for a long time. The information about enslavement shows up in census records, slave schedules, wills, estate inventories, and other documents. So I was able to find wills where some of my great grandfathers leave human beings to their beloved children. And they will name the child and name the person that has been given to that child. And one of the things, as I was working with those records, I was also reading a book called The Half Has Never Been Told by a historian named Edward Baptist. In July 2016, I read The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist and noticed that he does not use the word slaves. Rather, he calls them the enslaved. And those I've been calling slave owners, my ancestors, he called enslavers. At first, it seemed an arbitrary quirk. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up, opened my documents, and made the change. I was surprised by the power of that simple word change. Suddenly, a whole new group of people came to life in my past. So the book has several parts. The first part is about little essays about my own life and my story and sort of the way race intersects with my life. And then I do a little bit of history. I'm a historian, so I wrote a little bit about race in the beginnings of when the white people arrived on the continent, and a little bit about the race in the founders, which is in the news a lot these days. And then I looked at my heritage and looked at, there are a few pieces about whiteness. And then where I ended up in a place that I didn't have any anticipation that I was gonna be interested in. It was like, it totally shocked me that the last section of the book is about the American dream. It's about the meaning of America. And I think part of the reason it came out that way is that one of my closest friends, who was probably my most dedicated readers, who's the daughter of a white woman from Minnesota, but also an Egyptian geologist who migrated to this country when he was to come to college. She does not have the same attachment to the mythology of America that I do. Sort of an attachment that I hadn't really been aware of until, I think talking to her really made it clear to me that this wasn't just normal life, that this story of America had got its grips in me in ways that completely surprised me, and to turn out that I am reluctant to let it go. So I want to read, I think I've got time to read two more short pieces. One is the last piece about in the section called America. It's called Not My Place. When I decided to try to unravel my identity and responsibility as a white girl in America, I never imagined I would end up writing about the American dream. Even though it was the very challenge set before me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, the challenge that got me going in the first place. What does it mean to think that I am white? What does it mean for me, for my family, for my community, for this country? Can my journey possibly have anything to say to those whose experiences of America have been vastly different from my own? Can any white person pretend to have anything useful to say about how to recover from the mess we have created, from the harm that we have inflicted through our illusions, our assumption of innocence? These are the questions that have followed me throughout this project. This country was created by white men for the benefit of white men, but at the same time, they deployed universalizing language that may speak to us all. Over the past few years, I have learned that this is not a question I can answer. It is not my place to answer it, and yet I am drawn to the dream buried in their words, drawn to the possibility of democracy, of creating a society where we can live in peace, respect, and prosperity together, drawn to the possibility of liberty and justice for all. I'm feeling a little less optimistic about that right now than I was when I'm finishing this book, but I still think that these things, I mean, I still mean what it says here. And what I think I've learned about the value of the project for me, I'm not a very good activist. I've tried hard in varying forms to do activism. I've gone on marches. I participated in an organization called the Women's Committee on Central America back in the 80s when the US government was doing some horrible things down in that part of the world. I write letters, but I'm more of a contemplative person. And what I have learned that is, I think it's possible to loosen some of the unconscious ways that racism has operated in me. And it makes me easier in the world and easier during casual encounters of people who are not white. I also think I've learned that this kind of personal exploration can be an agent of change. I think, Mary, if I have time for one more brief thing, I'm going to read the very last piece in the book, which I almost should read the last two. My daughter, who is works for the Washington Sea Grant, she's an environmentalist working with the state to preserve the coastal environment in Washington state, and is a very pragmatic person, told me once that that I live in La La Land when she was a kid. But the last piece in the book is called Love. And it starts with two quotes. One is hate the sin, but love the sinner, which Jeanette and I tried to find who's supposed to have said that. And the best we can find is that it might've been St. Augustine, and it might've been Mahatma Gandhi, and it might've been somebody else. And then the other quote is from Bell Hooks. Only love can heal the wounds of the past. Love shines around the edges of writings about race by some of the most inspiring guides on my journey. Love turns out to be the unexpected and then obvious first step when we try to envision a way out of the morass. It holds our tension and allows us to see the possibility of community across fear and hate. I feel troubled by the knowledge that the first adage above is common in some Christian circles as a way to confront and deny homosexuality. That's the sin they are hating as they try to both embrace and hold their gay friends and relatives at arm's length. For me, the relevant sin is enslavement, the choice made by some of my ancestors to hold other humans in bondage. The relevant sin lies in the parade of institutions that followed: convict leasing, lynching, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and many more. I am trying to find a way to reach out with love, to claim my ancestors without turning my eyes away from the abomination at the center of their lives, at the hidden center of our lives. Philosopher George Yancey, in his letter to white Americans called Dear White America, asks us to listen with love to his plea that we fully face our complicity with the perpetuation of racism and white privilege. He asks for a quote, a sort of love that demands that you look at parts of yourself that might cause pain and terror, the kind that refuses to flee in the face of danger, end quote. Throughout The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin calls upon love as a source of hope, as perhaps the only source of hope. He advises his nephew, to whom the book is written, to accept with love the white people who surround him, who are, quote, still trapped in a history which they do not understand. He notes that the possibility of redemption will come when they learn, quote, how to accept and love themselves and each other. And when they have achieved with this, which will not be tomorrow and may very well be never, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. And it seems that his fear that we will remain trapped stems from the existence of those, quote, for whom power is more real than love. And when power, that's the end of the quote, and when power is more real than love, more compelling than grief, there is no way out. We must find our way to love, for love is power. Love opens and expands the power of community. Love allows for deep listening across difference. Love takes risks and opens our hearts. Love is power. That's it. That's all I have. But I'm quite happy to chat, to answer questions, to accept challenges, anything folks want to talk about.
Thank you so very much to Marcy Litle, whose book we are looking at today. And I hope that you will find your way to the website for the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South, where you can get the book, Illusions of Innocence. I'm sure it's available on other outlets as well, but I'm sure that buying it direct from the source is probably the best way to do it. Marcy, thank you very much. You have done what I imagined in the blurb that we gave for the book. You have shown us that it's not easy to look systemic racism in the eye and see oneself staring straight back. And I think that really is what you have done today as well. And I'm very grateful. I've got lots of questions, and I'm sure other people do too, but mostly I have gratitude to you for the book and for your work and for sharing it with us, and also for demonstrating for us how many forms of activism there are and how many forms of contemplative practice there are, because I think what you've again demonstrated is that you live at the intersection of those, and that your contemplative work and research and writing and teaching are really forms of activism, and certainly the activism that many others do would do well to be informed by the same. So the floor is open. I would request that people keep their comments brief so that we can hear from lots of people. We have more than 40 people on the call, and I'd like to hear from many of them, and also say your name and where you are, and that will help us. So go ahead, Jeanette Stokes would be first, right up out of the gate there. Go ahead, my friend.
I'm Jeanette Stokes. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, in my kitchen. Those are pots and pans. We've all learned to do everything we do from home if we also have an office, which we do. Working with Marcy on this book was a real pleasure, because she's such an accomplished writer and a really good editor, and quite responsive to any of our saying. We don't quite understand that. I simply wanted to say to those gathered that using this book, or using the list of books that our Reading Race group has used over the last 6 or so years, is a really great way for white people to delve into racism together. I cannot overstate the value to me personally of having a small group of 6, 8, 10, whatever, who would over time read these texts and discuss them together. Because for most of us, there comes a moment where we realize our own or our family's deep connection and possibly benefit, whether we lived in the deep South or the deep North, whose economy was based on slavery, or in the West. The roots of this country all go back to the same place. I even said to a friend, and this is the last thing I'll say, whose half of her family is French. I said, well, at least you don't have to worry about this with the French relatives. And she said, oh no, her ancestors lived in Marseille. They made soap. They got the materials to make the soap from Africa, from enslaved workers. So I just thank you, Marcy, for writing this book, and thank you everyone for coming today.
So I just want to say, in the reading group, the very last book that we read was a book about Tulsa, which is where Jeanette is from. And it was very moving for all of us to work together to help Jeanette process some of her own history through reading that book.
And thank you to both Jeanette and to Marcy for that. And just for those who might not have been on at the beginning when I said this, the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South reading race reading list, say that 3 times quickly, is available, and we will make it a part of the notes that we send out to you. So you will have this in your hot hands tomorrow or the next day or whenever that happens, but you will get that list. So you can in fact see the books that they're talking about. Thank you. The floor is open.
I think all of us need to have these discussions for sure, but how do you have discussions with people of color?
You know, I don't know the answer. I personally don't know the answer to that. I still live in most of my closest people are still white people. They're not all, but they still are. And I think the way it has affected my relations with people of color is that I am relaxed in a way I don't think I was before. And I guess maybe I have a small anecdote to describe this. This is a pretty dramatic one. I think mostly this happens in a much less dramatic way. Not too many years ago, we had in Durham, we had a couple of young women living across the street from us who I think they were pretty shortly out of college, and they had loud parties, which didn't really affect us, didn't bother us, but they really bothered their next door neighbors and one of the young men who was hanging out with these young women at the party was a young black man. And the next door neighbor kept complaining to the police about the parties. And one time, the young black man parked his car right in front of our house, and there's a no parking sign right in front of our house. And so the next door neighbor called the cops on him because of that. And the police came, we got involved. The police asked if we wanted, and then he got mad because he got a ticket for parking there, and he slashed our tires. He slashed the tires in my car because he thought we had been the ones to call the police. And so that's when the police came. And we talked with the young women across the street. We learned a little bit about his story. We learned that he had been very upset and a little bit drunk when he slashed the tires. And we decided to take the police out of the situation. And we decided to have a conversation. And so we sat around our dining room table, this young man and his girlfriend, and my husband and myself. And we talked about how, the choices that we were making. He tried to offer to pay for replacing the tires. And I knew that of the kinds of jobs he had. He worked as a bartender at a local pub. And I said, you can't afford to pay for my tires, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to think about what you did and know that and pay attention. You need to know the truth about what happened before you take that kind of action, because it was very hurtful. But we want you to go out and think about it and don't do it again. Just don't do it again. We don't want you to pay for the we're not going to call the police. We don't want you to pay for the tires. Just don't do it again. And he was very grateful. We stayed in touch a little bit. They moved away, so we've lost touch with him. So that was a pretty dramatic incident, but I think I was able to think more clearly about it because of all this work. And I think that's the way it shows up. So it's like I haven't gone out of my way to make Black friends, but when I cross paths with people of color, like the Asian man who sat beside me in a restaurant last night, we had a lovely little chat just out of the blue, and it was like it lets this unseen tension that's inside me, it lets it loose, so I can just be myself in the world more broadly than I used to be able to. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
It helps. It helps. It's part of it. It's part of it. What I'd like to do would be to have some conversations that aren't surrounded by some act of violence or something like that. And, and I don't know how to do it. I mean, I have a Black friend who is I haven't seen her in a long time, and I want to broach the subject with her. I want to talk to her about it. I want to tell her that I try not to be a racist, but I feel like I am, and it's been, I'm working on it. And I'd like to ask for her help, but someone told me that's the last thing Black people want to hear.
Oh,
Is how to help me with this. So.
Thank you, Liz. Let's move on. Victoria, you had your hand up. I don't know if it looks like your hands are full at the moment.
Yeah, I'm here. I have a little one that's moving around quite a bit. But I joined because I've been working with a lot of different folks at the university at UNC and trying to help bring a different type of diversity, equity, and inclusion into real life. And so I am an African-American studies major with a minor in social and economic justice. I'm also a person of color. The hardest thing is feeling like we have to be the ones to educate. So definitely this list that you all have is very beautiful. I've read a lot of things on the list. I support Marcy's book and really being able to understand how people actually feel. We're humans. So things that would make you uncomfortable probably make us uncomfortable too. It doesn't mean avoiding it. One thing that I share with people a lot is think about your kids. And if I was your daughter in the workforce and someone responded to things the way they've responded to me, how would you feel? And when you have the opportunity to be in that position, think about that. Would you want someone to respond to your daughter or your son that way in the workforce or as a neighbor or in the community or in the grocery store? Because kindness really does go a long way. Kindness, knowing, asking questions. And it's okay to say, I don't know the right thing and I might be saying it wrong. Help, or show me where I can get help. It's nothing wrong with that. I'm also the mom of a trans teen. I'm also a wife to another woman. So we want to have these conversations with people, and we're in intersections too, and things get uncomfortable for us too. But it's just important to try. And when you have the opportunity to lighten someone else's load or burden, do that. Ask how you can do that. Ask how you can help. And sometimes we don't know either, but just asking us for help is honoring and respectful of our experiences. But I appreciate the opportunity of being here with you all, because I deal with my coworkers as one of the only brown faces in the office. And it's very difficult to be the face of our diversity liaison and be the only different looking person in the office. But this is a great start, and it starts with the little things of being a neighbor, being a friend, being a mom, being there for people, just people he wants to talk to. So I'm gonna mute myself and pass. Thank you.
Jeanette and I did a workshop run by Melanie Morrison, who's now retired from doing this work, but it's called Doing Our Own Work. And it's workshops for white people trying to address the very questions you're asking, Liz. Melanie's retired, but other people have been following up with her work, and Jeanette has more information about that. And it's possible that Mary also knows about this, I'm guessing. So that might be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for your question and for your honest sharing, and also for sharing your little one with us. I think we all just, oh, I want to hold him, and oh, I can make him, I can make him happy. Well, he's in very good hands. Yes, Marcy, we do know some of those resources, and we've been trying to have a series of things here at Water. We had an excellent program a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Shaniqua Walker-Barnes on the question of what white people need to know about intersectionality. And that was, I think, one of the most informative things that we have had, because there's so many myths about, or misconceptions about, intersectionality. The floor is open. I have some questions which I'll be happy to offer if no one else does, but if someone has a question, please go ahead or raise your hand. Or
Janice, please, yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
I have a comment. I have spent, as an African American, I have spent from age 12 on in predominantly white communities. And I'm very comfortable walking in and out of communities. I used to lead school districts, and the majority of the folks in leadership that we talked to were white. My comment is, take care of white folks first, right? And I ask people, when I hear people say they want to talk to folks of color, leave us alone until you've done your own work. And the question is, why? What's the purpose of talking to someone of color, right? If it's just the next thing to do. So I really encourage people, racism is not an individual thing. It's a systemic and structural thing that occurs on both the individual level, but on the collective level. And what really needs to change are the policies, the laws, the structures, the procedures. That's what I'm going to say to you, work on that. So as we look at our country at this moment, struggling around who we want to be, if you are not on top of voter suppression, that's the biggest thing you can do right now. Get people to the polls. You need to vote. You need to get people to polls. You need to think about how you can have influence with policymakers at the local, the state, and the federal level. I don't need folks to talk to me. I'm good. I'm good. What I need you to change are the policies, the structures, et cetera, that affect me in negative ways. Because as someone mentioned, intersectionality, because of my identity. So I really encourage you, don't worry about, if you're in places where you naturally meet folks of color, be all in it, but don't just try to be with folks of color to be with us. That is not what we need. We need structures and policies and laws to change. And that's for all of us, not just for folks of color.
Janice, thank you. And Marcy, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. I think that's I really, really appreciate that comment. And I just also wanted to mention one of the books. I mean, there's so many good books on our list, but one of the books on our list by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is very focused on the way this whole policy question works. And so if you're interested in sort of a written version of some of what Janice was just saying, that Kendi book would be a really good place to start.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm coming at this from a different angle. I'm Barb. I'm a Catholic sister who lives in Seattle, Washington. And we have been, as a whole congregation, actually, we have been studying, excuse me, studying racism, reading about it, talking about it. And in more recent years, we have, as most religious communities have now, more people that are starting to come from other countries and other cultures. And so we've been trying to understand interculturality and how to live together in a more equal way. One of the things that we've learned is that when you have a group of people from different cultures living in the same, or different races living in the same household, you know, some people have an A, you know, that's their tradition, like the A tradition, and there's some people in there that has a B way of living, and some C and some D. But when you all get together in one household, you cannot live by a particular culture. You have to invent an E way of living together that doesn't have a predominant way of doing things, but somehow be able to put the group together, live together in a way that isn't dominated by white people. And one of the things that I've tried to start now is figuring out how we as a congregation can learn about each other's cultures. You know, not just like your history of your family history or your ministry history, but what is your cultural history? What are the things that are of value? What are the things that are traditional? What's considered rude? What's considered not rude within a culture? So we're trying to, at this point, we're trying to figure out, there's a group of us that are trying to figure out how to understand each other's cultures. And we've done a lot of reading and book study together, that kind of thing. So I'm looking for like the next steps in terms of really understanding each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcy, did you want to comment?
I don't think so. I think it sounds like a really wonderful next project.
Yeah. Let me ask you just a couple of things that I had on my mind. One is these short essays in your book add up to a deep dive. I wonder if your method was chosen deliberately, or did the method choose you?
Oh my,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the method chose me.
Method chose you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I could a little. I mean, I wrote a dissertation many years ago in history. It was a book that I mean, it was a dissertation that it was good. It was fine. It was on tax policy in colonial Mexico. I know, exactly. It sort of showed the degree of self-alienation I was experiencing at that time.
And purpose, you finished your degree.
I finished, yes. And I tried for 2 years to turn it into a book and realized it wasn't going to happen. So then I got really traumatized by the whole process of writing. It was just like, I stopped writing for a long time. But, and then I don't know if any of you have ever, there was a woman who taught English at Duke named Jane Tompkins. And she helped me learn how to write again. And one of the things that I did, the sort of first serious writing I did was poetry. And so these just came mostly from, I have learned that I just have to wait for things to come. And then when they come, I have to pay attention. And then, and as my friend Grace, who I'm about to go see, she read the book and was talking about how, you know, it's so beautiful. I mean, how did you do that? And I said, Grace, how many times do you think I went through each of those chapters? And she said, oh, I don't know, 2 or 3. And I said, how about 10 or 11, 12, 15? I mean, so you write it and then you write it. I'm picky about writing. I do a lot of editing for Jeanette because I love beautiful writing.
Well, it shows. And I just have another question, which is not unrelated entirely, but it's really a question again of method. How can we keep the necessary grief work, which is part of this process as we learn more about our own complicity, those of us who are white, with racism? How can we keep it from becoming all about us? And how can we avoid solipsism in this? Because there's a way in which the very approach, not yours in particular, but those of us who are white looking at our complicity in racism, once again becomes about us. And I know that there's a part of that that has to be the case, but there's also the systemic, the policy, the things that we need to be about. That I just wonder how you balance those things, and how do you avoid, how do you let that information coming in and the grief that it churns up become a catalyst for change rather than another, as it were, a deep dive inside. I just think that's a danger.
I agree. And I don't know that I'm always successful, but I would say that I'm a meditator. I have done a lot of work about letting, sort of letting go, detach. I mean, I think I think I've learned how to learn difficult things, feel the grief, and also not feel too attached.
Thank you. Janice, you have your hand up, and then I'd like to finish up with you, and then we'll let you have the last word, and then we'll close our session at the top of the hour and keep our conversation going for those who wish. But I want those who have covenanted for this hour to have a graceful exit. Janice, your turn.
All right, Mary, thank you. First, I want to say I have no idea how I got on this mailing list. I looked at my calendar, it said I had something at 10 o'clock, but for some reason I was meant to be here with y'all. And I'm so grateful for the conversation and you're welcoming me. And I want to respond to Barb. I tell people I was born African-American and raised Roman Catholic, and was very lucky to have had great religious orders help shape my value system. So I think you are on the right track about how do we learn from each other. And it's in business, it's called the third way. We each bring something, and what's the new way we create? And you do that by creating stories, by telling each other's stories, learning from stories and saying, what's the value that I'm learning from so-and-so's story? Because I don't just have to be with white folks, I'm with all kinds of people. And I sort of feel you show up and you're gracious. That's step one. So I can hang out in any community. If you were to look at a group of my friends, you wouldn't know anything about me. And I've worked hard to do that, So I'm going to say thank you for letting me be here. I don't know how I got on the mailing list, but thank you.
Well, the only thing I would say to you, Janice, is come back.
I shall.
Come back. And Barb, thanks for your comment. I don't know which community you are, but I would guess it may be a Dominican crowd up there, or it could be the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. Am I close? CSJPs? Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. That's a great crowd, and they're founded with the great love and work of Margaret Anna Cusack. And it's a wonderful community. So great to have you, and give my greetings to those good women. We wish you strength and courage in facing the realities of racism and other forms of injustice, but we also wish you the deep satisfaction and the heart that comes with communities like this and the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South that are trying to do something about it. So have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the summer. With that, we will simply open the floor to continue conversation with those who would like to, and others who must leave us now. Please take a gracious exit, and thanks again to everybody for being with us. Thank you. Thanks. Floor is open. Who has a comment? Let's see.
Jeanette.
Jeanette.
Jeanette does. Go ahead, Jeanette.
I want to thank Water for these Water Talks. It's just a fabulous series, and you've done such a good job. Thanks, I assume, to the younger generations who know how to capture and post. I was in a meeting this morning, and there was a technical part of it we needed to copy, and then afterwards it's on my computer somewhere, and somebody half my age is going to have to figure out how to get it off. So thank you. Yeah, it's really, they're great community building. They're great learning experiences. I also saw Resource Center for Women in Ministry people on here, including people from the West Coast. So it was really fun to do this together. And thank you, Marcy. Some of you can see what fun a reading group led by Marcy would be. She is a true academic. She loves to read, loves to extract quotes, loves to get a conversation going. But again, I want to encourage people, even without someone who feels like they're a really good teacher and a really good leader, just get a group of friends and dive in. Because what has been written in this country in the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, since many of us were way out of school, is really good and really accessible.
And I just want to add one thing to that, which is I'm thinking about what Janice said about how hard it is to be asked. And one of the things that you can get if you do the kind of reading group that Jeanette and I do, and that Jeanette was just talking about, is there are so many amazing books written by African-American authors that they will tell you. They will tell you a lot of what you need to hear and what you need to know. And you can talk about it with white folks, and it will affect the way you interact with people who are people of color later. I mean, so they will tell you you read Ibram Kendi, read Tressie McMillan Cottom, read The Vanishing Half, which is one of the most brilliant novels I've ever read. Those are all books that are on the list, and you can find them there. But you can learn a lot of this, what you need to know from reading. This spoken as a true reader, someone who's been reading all the time ever since I was about 5 years old. But
yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that there is, I think, a legitimate hunger for us to be in relationship with people who don't look like me, for me to be in relationship. And all I've ever been able to do in my life is to wait until there are people who are Black or Hispanic or a different sexual orientation or whatever, who seem to want to step into a space. Some of those are workshops and trainings like that I've been to over the years. Some are sitting down next to a concert and talking to somebody. I realize that my deep hunger for that may not match someone else's need or want. And so what we've been learning in recent years is that to assume that for a person of color, I may be a bother. And so just like learning to ask little children if we can hug them instead of assuming that because I'm an adult and someone else is 4, they want me to put my arms around them, sort of gently making space for that if it can happen. It's such a dance, and their dance steps I don't know well. Mary has lived for whole years at a time in other cultures, or at least one other culture I know of, and may have learned it's good to be a stranger, good to be a minority. So I just want to honor that longing that I think some white people of goodwill have, and that we are just trying to figure out how to dance with that.
Yeah, and that changes and has changed over time, and as the agenda has changed, and there's one of the things I come away from things like this is say there's no right answer, but there are a lot of wrong ones. There's no right answer to these things, but there are a lot of ways that I and others make mistakes in how we approach this. But the major point is to be aware, attuned, and make it a priority to be dealing with these issues. And then I think other opportunities emerge as they do. But the old approach and really it's an approach from scarcity. The 3 Black women in a field, like in religion in the early days, Jeanette, you remember there were 3 Black women in the field at the level at which most of us were working, and there were lots of us and few of them, and how unfair we were to them. And now we have something like the Katie Geneva Cannon Center, in Richmond at the Presbyterian Seminary, so we can take leadership from them, not just as you saw my water article last month, the water newsletter, that we can not only work with them, but take leadership from them. The same with the Pan Autumn, the Pacific, the Asian American Women in Theology and Ministry, that they have now incorporated a 501c3 35 years later. They've got an organization. So we can take leadership from them, that we can learn from them. They can lead the way. We don't have to do it all. And we shouldn't be doing a lot of it, especially from predominantly white groups. So that's changed, and but it's tricky. It's tricky. How about others? Please go ahead. Maybe somebody who hasn't spoken.
I think that's, sorry, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. I think that's something that stuck with me since Dr. Shanika Walker-Barnes talked with us, was that emphasis on how much, especially in traditional circles, like I come from the Mennonite Church, and reconciliation is a big thing, and that's all relation-based. And so we look at racism as a relation-based thing rather than a system-based thing. And so the emphasis on this kind of forced diversity can be pretty harmful for people of color when we're not ready to be in those spaces, and we haven't fully explored our whiteness. But also in the fact that, like, we can have those spaces that are like this, where it's a majority of white people, and we can ask kind of the questions that that can come from pretty vulnerable places, while not putting that on people of color. But I just really appreciated this space today. And Marcy, that I remember, gosh, I mean, I haven't been very long on my anti-racism journey, I guess you could call it, but I remember one of the first things learning about was like white guilt, and kind of white guilt kind of turning into confessions and confessing your racist sins. And I just appreciated how you didn't come at it like that. And I think, Mary, your question earlier about how to have these spaces without it kind of being self-flagellating, and it's more like this is to learn from rather than to beat ourselves up over our past errors. But
well, and I think
that makes sense.
And I think one of the key things is that we have always been, as women, there's a dimension along which we have not always been at the center. But as white people, we have been at the center. And so that's one of the, that's one of the first things you have to let go of, I think, or it's eventual things you have to let go of, is this notion of being at the center. I mean, I remember years ago, I write about this very briefly in the book. Years ago, I was at a thing at Duke, and I don't love talking. Back then, I was much shyer about talking in public. And it was a diversity thing. I was working in administration, and it was a diversity thing. And I was concerned because the tenor of the group was about getting more people of color into the space so that we will look better in a way, but no sense that having people whose culture is different, whose life experience is different, whose experience of power in the US is different, is going to change the institution. They hadn't gotten to that place, right? It's not just you bring more people in, it's that when people with different experiences come together, the whole structure that surrounds them is going to have to change.
I wondered too, I had a very pointed question about this that I was thinking about, Marcy. One is, what do it's this question, what do your children say? Excuse me, not necessarily your biological children, but younger people in general. How is it different for them than for many of us who are now over 30? Does their presumably more integrated experience of growing up with more diversity and community than many of us experienced help them to see your point, the point of your book? Or is there a way in which this reads as simply history unrelated to today, yet one more removed from the source. You know, like the family story kinds of stuff. Is it one more remove, or is it really, you know, for people who are, say, in their 20s, or you know, as opposed to being in their 60s? I mean, is it another remove?
It seems like maybe it is. I mean, I don't, since I'm not hanging out with Duke students anymore, it's harder for me to say. I do, the younger women I hang out with mostly I know through Jeanette. I have a daughter who's in her 40s who I think is struggling with a lot of these issues in the institution that she works in. And I think the institution is still kind of mired in a diversity framework that may not be as helpful as it could be. My other child is somebody we acquired kind of lovingly but accidentally, who is actually a Chicano. So it's a very different experience dealing with him, because he's a person of color who lives in a completely white environment, and he's in Southern California. So he and I have very interesting conversations about it, but I don't think I have a good answer to your question.
Okay, well, excuse me. It just came to me that you know, so much of this is so contextual, and so and especially for those of us who do live, and I see some people on the screen who have many regular experiences with people from other cultural and racial ethnic groups who are part of communities of those people. I think that makes a big difference too. If your church, for example, is predominantly African American, or if some of your close friends and colleagues are people from other countries, that it does take a different form than.
I think it does too. I think, and I confess in the book that my world is still pretty white. Yeah, I don't know that I don't know what else to say about it, except that I think agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think what you do with your book, if I may say so, at least what my experience of it was that this is your book, and your approach is one way to make that different. And it's all part, you know, this racism is such a deeply systemic hideous component, that the many ways of getting at it, it's sort of, if I may use a homey analogy, it's sort of like trying to change the Catholic Church. It's like so big and so awful in terms of its, and yet so wonderful in terms of its many dimensions, that there's not one way to do it. There have to be multiple strategies, and they just have to work in an overlapping way.
Right. Yeah, I think
it's not going to happen easily, and probably not in our lifetime. But
yeah, mine would be maybe the contemplative, academically minded introverts path.
Yeah, without apology. See, and I would just say without apology, because I think there are people who would suggest that it should be different from that. And I guess what I took from your book is, no, this is as legitimate a way to do that work as any other.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. I just want to say thanks so much for letting me have this place to talk a little bit more about my work, Mary. It was really delightful. And now I'm going to go get on a ferry and hang out on an island for a couple of days. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I hope we've thanked you sufficiently, but I will once again say thank you, and look forward to getting your notes, and we'll put together everything and get stuff out to people, and look forward to following your career. We might have to have you back to talk about your painting, because one of my other questions was the relationship between the artwork, which I thought was stunning, that you do, and the writing and teaching that you've done. And we didn't even hear anything about your Latin American experiences and exploits. And as a longtime Argentine person interested in Argentina and having lived there, and now following very closely the very hard situation in Cuba, as well as in Haiti and Honduras. I mean, just so many places. But Cuba, for us at Water, is very dear because of our connection with the seminary in Matanzas, and they have taken in 70 pediatric COVID patients to care for at the seminary, since the classes are not happening in the dormitories are empty, and with no food, no syringes, just nothing in Cuba. So anyway, that's just, you'll see that on our list.
Right.
Related things, but yeah, so there's lots more to talk about, Marcy. I look forward to it.
That's great.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being with us.